Hello, 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 and welcome everybody to this, our Legends podcast. I believe there are many ways to lead a life and everybody has stories and I want to tell them. And today we have the amazing Gretchen Miura with us. Hi, Gretchen.
Hi, Sarah.
Lovely to see you. So it's going to be a really interesting one. And we are nearing a year into the COVID-19 crisis. I think this time last year, we were all going, what's going on in China? And then little by little, the story started unfolding in a way that I don't think any of us could have predicted at the time. So we're recording this in February 2021. Gretchen and I have had an interesting year, to say the very least. And we've been working together this year, and we'll be working together again this coming year on some exciting things together. And yeah, I'm really delighted to introduce you here. This will be going out, I think, in March. So this is our spring or late February. Actually, maybe it's February. I think it's next week. Oh, this is real life unfolding in front of us. Okay, so let's get into it. About Gretchen. Gretchen is a mindfulness teacher, an avid maker, and a mother of 4. Originally from New Jersey in America, Gretchen lives in northern Japan on the Obon Peninsula, where she and her husband run a Zen temple. She hosts mindfulness retreats, classes, and workshops in English, as well as traditional ceremonies and activities for the local community. She sells her handmade bento bags, face masks, and accessories at her online shop, SORAbento. She is living a life focused on creativity, belonging, and connection. And you certainly belong here. And I can't wait to connect with you today, Gretchen.
Oh, likewise. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Me too, me too. All right, so let's get into it. So why don't you tell us about your ancestry, your childhood, and your upbringing?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in New Jersey, which is on the East Coast of America. It's sort of about an hour outside of New York. So everything sort of rotates around New York. But I was in the suburbs. So it was just a very green sort of neighborhood type of sort of idyllic childhood. Like we had blocks with a lot of friends there and just sort of an easy, slow-paced life. I'm the youngest of 4, and my parents are from the Midwest. So my dad grew up in Ohio. My mom grew up in Indiana. They met in college at Purdue University. And both families have a lot of German ancestry, Irish ancestry. My maiden name is Zachman, which is very German. Yeah. And of course, my first name is Gretchen, which is also very German. So both of those families have a lot of German ancestry as well as Irish. I also was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school, wore a little like Catholic uniform. So my parents moved to New Jersey for work. So that's how we got to the East Coast. While most of their sort of cousins and family, some of them stayed back in the Midwest and then some moved on to the DC area.
Interesting. So it's the Garden State, right? New Jersey. So this suburban lifestyle, I can really conjure it up in my head.
Well, it's funny because you're British, so you don't know that New Jersey is sort of like the butt of a lot of jokes in America.
I know.
Okay, so it's like,
I get it.
Yeah, so everybody makes jokes about what turnpike exit do you live off of, or they fly into Newark Airport and then they think that's what all of New Jersey looks like. And then of course people in New York totally look down at people in New Jersey, right? But it's absolutely a beautiful state. We have the shore, which is what we call the beach, and it runs the whole length of the coast. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And then inland, it really is this green sort of rolling hills, a lot of history. Because George Washington had his troops there during the Revolutionary War. There was a tree in our town that was an oak tree that was there before, like they said, dated before Columbus. So there's just a lot of history, a lot of beautiful old buildings. So it's actually a beautiful place. And everybody who's actually been there knows that, but still people tease me from being.
Yeah, sure. I kind of think of it as a little bit like Liverpool, actually, kind of port town that then really got hit hard in the 80s. and that kind of feeling as well. Great. And what was your experience of being raised a Catholic?
Yeah, I had a positive experience.
Okay.
My parents have a deep faith, and they are sort of laid back and progressive at the same time. So it was sort of a big part of our life. Like I mentioned, I went to St. James School, which was attached to our church. We went to church every Sunday, but it didn't feel oppressive in any way. It just sort of felt like it was a big part of our life. I didn't totally connect with the religion. Like, it never really resonated with me. And my parents really accepted that. So as you're coming into your teenage years, it just never really landed with me. And I never felt that they sort of forced it on me. So I could sort of witness that it was something really meaningful and important to them, but it didn't totally have the same effect for me. And one thing it did provide was a tremendous amount of community. You know, we had a lot of friends at the church. I could walk there. I knew the priest. I was comfortable going there. So it just provided a lot of safety. And then you and I have talked about this, but I'm the youngest of 4. And when I was 5, my brother, who was the second oldest, he died in a car accident. And his name is Chris. And I do know that the church was just a profound source of support for my parents, as well as me. So for me, it was a very positive experience to be part of that community and that church growing up. Yeah,
I have to admit that I really miss that about church. Really miss. I think sometimes when we get to this age, we end up just being around people who are a similar age, similar values, similar style to us. Apart from us, obviously living in Japan. But then even then you create that. But I really miss that kind of access to like the oldest people in the community and the youngest people, and all the rituals that go around that, and the support systems, and, you know, the babies, the old people, the priests, the lay people, everything. It was, you know, I used to give out the bread and wine at church.
Yeah, you were raised Catholic as well.
I was like that. But I wasn't fancy. I wasn't like pious or anything like that. I was just really into the community of it all, and wanted to be a priest at age 17. Can you believe
that? Wow.
Well, Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister. I was like, we're on.
Fantastic. Wow.
The Queen was the Queen, so both of our heads of state were like women. I was like, excellent, I shall be a priest. It's only a matter of time before Pope JP2 comes and says, women, you're in.
Oh my God. Well, we're still waiting. Maybe Pope Francis. Wow, what a wonderful way to grow up, feeling so empowered, you know. And we unfortunately are much slower in America, having women role models at that level. Yeah.
But still, we've got Kamala now. So
now we're getting there. It's very, very exciting. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's get back into it then. So you just mentioned there that age 5, your brother was killed in a car accident. If you feel able to talk about that, I know we've talked about it quite extensively, but there's an awful lot of, it's a sensitive thing to talk about in terms like this, but there's a lot of interesting, not the right word, but kind of interesting things that come out of an incident like that. So let's get into it. I just think I'm holding that little girl on the stairs in my heart right now. So
well, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. You know, to be honest, I couldn't talk about it for a very long time because it was unprocessed grief. I hadn't really dealt with it. It was sort of trauma that I had sort of trapped inside of me. And so really it's only the last 3 to 4 years that I was able to start talking about it. And then even this year, I was able to really finally sort of fully, properly grieve my brother. And that's actually really opened me up to want to talk about him, to want to sort of discover how other people grieve. But when, you know, I was 5. So of course I have all of these sort of visceral memories of the night he died. And then there was always this before and after, right? It's like your life just completely splits into halves. Like there's before he died, after he died. And before he died, I have memories of him, but I always grew up sort of afraid that I was going to lose those memories because they were like, I always felt like they were tissues dissolving in water. You know, I was so afraid to lose those memories. And so I would really hold on tight. And then I have these very visceral memories of the night he died, because I have two sisters. My one oldest sister was 18 at the time. My brother was 17. And so my parents had them when they were young, still in college, and then sort of had a gap. I think my mother may have had a couple of miscarriages. And then I think my sister, who's just a year older than me, was sort of an oops baby. And then they had me as like a companion, right? It's hard to have like just a little kid by themselves. So there's a bit of a split. There's like a 10-year split between, let's say, my brother and then my sister. And then the biggest split is between me and my oldest sister, which is 13 years. Mm. So my sister, who was only, I think, 7 at the time, and I was 5, we were in bed and there was like a ring at the door. And we, just the way our staircase is, we peeked around, like peeked around. And again, this is just my memory. I don't even know how truthfully, but this is the memory I have. Mm-hmm. My sister and I are peeking around the stairwell, and there's a priest and a police officer. And you just know it's bad. And my parents were at the door, and that's this image that's like burned in my brain. And then we went back to bed. I always slept with her. I was always afraid to sleep by myself. So I had my own bedroom, but I would always run into her room, regardless. Before my brother died, it was just, so we always slept together. And I just remember being like stiff as a board in the bed, sort of petrified, like something bad's happening and I don't know what it is. And they must have gone to the hospital. Now, I don't think he had been pronounced dead yet, but they went to the hospital. But what was really beautiful out of this moment is, like I mentioned before with the church, it was just a very loving community. Like my family had a lot of family friends. My brother and sister were in high school. My brother was on the football team. So they just were really, really involved in the friends stay with us. My parents had friends stay with us that night, my sister and I. So my oldest sister went to the hospital. I think she was out anyways at a party. And I just remember one of my brother's friends sitting by our bed that night, like tucking us back in and just sitting with us. And then, and just that safety, that feeling of like, something bad's going on. And I didn't know what was going on, by the way, but also that sort of sense of love and safety, feeling really like cared for by the community. And then the next morning, again, the next sort of visceral memory is I'm sitting on my dad's lap. My mom's sitting next to him. We're in our family room. I'm sitting with my sister, who's just a year older than me. And then my dad is telling me, your brother's died. He's been in a car accident. And just, you sort of peel away from reality because you don't really know what that means. Or, I didn't really know what that meant. And my dad was crying. My mother was sort of shell-shocked. And I remember like giggling and laughing because I just was so nervous and scared by it all and just feeling really overwhelmed and not understanding it.
Yeah.
And so I have all of these very, very distinct memories from those first few days that are just really, really deeply ingrained. But like I said, there was a lot of love, a lot of support. There were always people at our house. Then we had the church, going through the whole process of the funeral. So there were sort of these sort of markers that you go through it. And I remember at one point just feeling very overwhelmed by all the people because I'm very introverted even now. So I love being around people, but you need to recharge and be by yourself. So as a young girl, I went up to my room. I just needed to be by myself. There was tons of people at the house and I had a little record player and I put this record on and it was Raindrops Are Falling on Your Head by Burt Bacharach, right?
Yeah.
I put it on and I was just sitting there, with my legs tucked underneath me, listening to this song, sort of feeling what was going on. And then I changed the record to put on a new song because, they were singles.
Yeah.
And then I stood up and I stepped on the record and I broke it in half. The Raindrops Are Falling on Your Head. And that's when the fullness of the loss hit me. It was almost like this little record, breaking this record, stepping on it, knowing I could never piece it back together. It was like the loss of my brother was sort of in that record. And I just remember being sort of hysterical by myself in the room and it just really, really hitting me. And that was probably within a couple of days of him actually dying. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was obviously a very hard thing for a family to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, what became difficult was sort of this story that I started to believe, which was, you're too young to remember your brother, or you didn't understand what was going on, or you didn't really know him that well. And I was just sort of absorbing this from like the ethos, you know, and a lot of it was probably really well-intentioned adults being like, you're fine, kids are resilient, or you're too little, you don't remember him, but you're sort of absorbing all of this, right? And I just want to say here that my parents were amazing parents. Like, they kept it together. We had a family full of joy and laughter, and I have such deep admiration for them. But I don't think at that time, this was the early 80s, there wasn't really a lot of attention to how are the kids feeling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And what is grief?
Psychologists or school counselors. Yeah. Yeah.
And there was none of that. So what had happened is sort of, you know, Chris died. We had this tremendous outpouring of support, which was very real. It was felt, but there was no discussing what was going on, you know, particularly the inner landscape, right? And that sort of, when you're so young, you don't really understand what is death. And then I always felt I grew up sort of living death. I learned it through the horror of missing somebody that you love, right? And that was really traumatizing. So I remember like, sitting on the steps, just willing him to come home. You know, maybe he'll come home today. Maybe he'll come home today. Just sitting on these little steps waiting for him. Or another time I remember waking up from a dream. And in the dream, he was, you know, part of the dream. And I woke up and there's this sort of nanosecond where you're still sort of in that dream state. And he's still part of my life. And then again, imagine a 5 or 6 year old, you're waking up to, oh no, he's gone. He's not here. And really being flooded with, you know, anxiety or sadness, because it's like, oh wow, he's gone, you know, but then not really having any tools to deal with these emotions, you know, because again, there wasn't a lot of focus on how do little kids grieve. So I had a very loving, supportive family. I had a great school and community, but I definitely didn't work through some of these deeper feelings of grief and loss. And it was confusing for me because I was so little, but I was sort of living it so profoundly because it was so real. Like the reality itself of him not being there every day was sort of just,
it had its own tangible, almost. It had its own texture, its own, the absence of him was, would that be fair?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, later on, like I said, even these last few years, I started to realize because I was so young, I didn't really have sort of a belief system or language to sort of make sense of it. So I was sort of just living the experience of losing one. So in that sense, it just became quite intense. So yeah, and then the further we got away from his actual death, it just became almost like we didn't talk about him too much. And like I said, it was sort of this whole, you know, adults in my life are like, you're fine, kids are resilient, let's move on, right? And so I just sort of felt a deep loss around that, you know, and a real need to sort of understand what I was going through or what this experience was, but I never really got it. And so it just became sort of this like solidified, you know, tightness, you know, how emotional pain does. You know, I don't think I would categorize it as trauma, but close to this, just sort of a profound pain that never got sort of metabolized. I didn't understand it. And so it did become something that I had a very, very hard time talking about. And then of course, it sort of comes out in funky ways and you don't know why it's coming out in funky ways. You know what I mean? And I remember sometimes just being like, I'm so angry and I don't know why. And also you would look around and you think, wow, I have everything. I have this lovely community and family and I'm so angry, you know, or I'm so sad. And of course you could sort of point to, oh, I've lost a brother, but we didn't talk about it. And then just to skip way ahead, and we can sort of go back and forth, like about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to think I really need to start healing this grief this sort of trauma. And I finally, it was almost like getting the courage up to talk to my mother and father about it. They're divorced now, so I talked to them separately about it. And when I brought this up with my mother, I did sort of say, like, that was hard, not having a space to talk about Chris, or not sort of have the space to express my feelings, right? Like I had to sort of hold it in. And she said that our family doctor at the time had advised her, you know, don't talk about Chris. You don't want the other kids to feel overshadowed or like he was your favorite. And she's like, I really regret taking his advice. And it was so illuminating for me, though, because I could only bring that up with my mother because I had no anger or resentment with her, right? It was really just coming to say, hey, this was hard for me. I think you did everything right, but this was hard for me. But even her adding that, I thought, oh, I had so much compassion for her, because I thought she took the wrong advice, you know, because she had said it didn't really feel right to her. She wanted to talk about Chris night and day, you know, but she was sort of giving these advice from different people, not just the doctor, of like, you know, don't talk about him too much. Like, it's a new chapter, move on. It's a very Western way of grieving, you know, move on, move on, move on. And so it was really nice to have that conversation with my mom. And I felt really bad. I thought, oh, this was a mother who was grieving, who wanted to talk about her son, but was advised not to. And then I'm also suffering because I wanted to talk about my brother.
There's so many things there's so much stuff around grief and death. I mean, just a couple of things I've noted here is like when you said like you had this trauma trapped inside of you, it's like the death itself is one thing, but then that's actually a secondary piece that actually that's the thing that needs to be dealt with. And it's so interesting you should say that. And that, so that's a second, that the thing you just talked about there, the not talking about it, that also has a life of its own, that kind of, so there's two things here. Then the other thing is, at the moment, because of the conversations that we're having so much, I decided I should start to just educate myself a bit more. So one thing I always do is listen to a podcast called Griefcast, which is about comedians talking about death. So it's got a lightness to it, but it's also really frank. But I'm listening, there was a woman on that called Julia Samuel, who's a grief therapy specialist. And I'm listening to her book at the moment, Grief Works, which is, it's a difficult listen. If you're deep in things, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're curious or you're ready to go there, because she talks about the experience of her clients. And so for the people who are listening, but one thing she says is that there's, from a therapeutic stance, I think it's around the age of 8 or 7 or 8, where children truly understand the permanence of death. 5, I think, is a borderline where they start to understand the permanence of death, but under that age, it's and again, there's probably different approaches to this in Japan or in non Judeo-Christian lineages, but that's what they've noted from a therapeutic standpoint, that under 7, 5, I think is the cutoff, is that kids don't understand the permanence of it. So they ask, oh yes, so-and-so's dead, so when is he coming back? That kind of thing. So just interesting to note that. I don't know if that means anything to you or if you've heard similar.
Well, that's what I experienced, was that sort of that gray zone of like, why isn't he coming back? Maybe if I wait for him long enough on this stair, he'll come back, right? Or and that's very hard for a parent to watch too. That was the other thing when I brought it up with my father, just sort of saying, hey, this is the sort of trauma I carried into adulthood. He was like, I had no idea how to care for a 5-year-old who fully didn't understand what death was. I mean, could you imagine losing your child and then having a young child just sort of processing it and not really having the skills to help them, right? Yeah. And that brings us to what you were saying, which is so spot on. It's like in Buddhism, we call it the second arrow, right? Okay. There's a difference between pain and suffering. So pain is inevitable. People tend to confuse the two words, but we die, we age, we get sick, we break up with people we love. I mean, there is pain. A lot of times people use the word suffering, but actually suffering is the second arrow. So something painful and horrible has happened. My brother has died. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
We're all going to die. he died. The suffering is then how we react and how we respond to it, right? And when it's unskilled, right, then there's more suffering. That's all it is. But that second arrow is the suffering, where the first arrow, again, can be sort of easily metabolized if you can accept it, right? And then I would say, I think my parents, again, through their Catholicism faith, really did have a deep faith, and it was profoundly comforting for them, because they have this belief system that sort of supports them. It really didn't land with me. It just never landed. And I remember like my dad saying this thing when I was young, and I mean, I feel bad for him because, again, he's trying to help this child make sense of this horrible loss. And my brother, I guess, liked Captain Crunch cereal. It's like a really sugary cereal. And I remember sitting on the kitchen counter, and he's like, well, you know, Chris is up in heaven eating Captain Crunch. And I was like, that's so stupid. Like, I was like, I didn't say it out loud. And I know he was trying to comfort me, like this image of, well, Chris gets to eat Captain Crunch day and night, you know? And I was like, that doesn't even make sense. That's stupid, you know? And so for whatever reason, it just never comforted me, that faith system, which is probably what brought me to where I am now. Sort of that yearning, that searching, that sort of something inside of you that's like that spiritual quest of like, how does this all play a role? And we've talked about this as well too. Me not really fully having the opportunity to grieve my brother really made me feel a big disconnect, you know, like this sense of disconnection. We've talked about ancestors, you know, it just sort of severed something very deep because I couldn't make sense of what had happened. And that severing was quite a lot of suffering for me.
So it was the second arrow.
The second arrow, yeah.
It's so beautiful, that image is, and I think that this is the when religion works at its absolute most perfect. That's what it is. It's like I feel almost like we're talking about Catholicism and Buddhism here. Both religions that have been accused of having kind of obsessions with death, but that's it. That's it. The whole thing is constructed to help us to deal with the daily realities of being a human being, and the rituals and all that kind of stuff that helps people to move through things. I just, you know, the first arrow, the rituals can deal with that. And also because people understand that the second arrow is coming, there's also things in place for that too. So I guess, like say in the Catholic religion, of course, we have like last rites, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's when the priest comes in and hopefully before the person's passed, they give them this special ritual prayers that are to help them to move on to I suppose heaven in that regard. And I think if they're able, they're given communion as well. But I know it involves holy oils. So these rituals they're all there. They're all in place to help that transition for the living and the dead. So there's the supernatural side of it, which is, I'm going to switch into my experience with Japanese death rituals now, which is that you're given a certain amount of time. There's markers. So the idea is that the person who dies gets caught between the next life where they ascend and the current life, and they're trying to come back. So I remember when my granddad died, my Oji-chan, and we were there and we chanted all afternoon. I remember doing this because my husband kept having to nudge me because I kept dropping off because it was so cold outside and so warm inside, and we were chanting in Japanese. And I could read it because it's all in hiragana actually. So I was trying to keep along, but I kept falling asleep and he was like, this, isn't it terrible? But that was to try and help the granddad to move on into the next life, but obviously it's for us too.
Absolutely, that's it, Sarah.
Too. And then that night, my cousin Wakana, she had a dream about Oji-chan, so she wakes up the next day and she says, we've had a dream about Oji-chan. So it was everybody back into the room with the temple and the ashes in it and chant again. No, I didn't get to do that because I had to get a train back to work from Hyogo-ken, but and so they chanted and chanted and chanted, and it's like the visualization is that he's looking back going, oh, I don't want to leave you. Oh my God, I'm getting quite emotional.
Yeah.
But we have to help him to move. But actually it's for Wakana, right? It's to help her to process that too. And for all of us. And it's just so incredible. And then not 49 days, is that right? In the Japanese tradition. And that year you don't celebrate. So there's no cards, parties and stuff like that. It's very, very interesting. Of course, in the UK, I don't know about America, we used to, until about 100 years ago, you would wear black to tell people, I'm in the shit. I'm deep in that. I'm in the arrows, whichever one, first and second arrows. Or if you were a kid, you'd go to school with a black armband on for a certain amount of time, so that the teachers and the kids knew this is a special time for this person. We don't do that anymore, so there's no indicators.
I know.
But
we need time, you know, we need time.
Yeah.
And I love the markers, you know, we're going to grieve for a year. Of course, there is no timeline for grief. We know that.
No.
But it's nice to sort of set aside time.
Yeah. And in the psychological world, we've kind of processed that into the 7 stages of grief, which is not a line. It's more like that, right?
Yeah.
It's a multi-dimensional graph that
right.
But I also just find those things very useful to just go like, oh, there's not something wrong with me. I'm in, whether it be the second arrow or the first arrow, or I'm in the first 49 days, or I'm in this place, or I need to chant, or whatever that is, in something that I think we've lost a lot in the kind of more secular world.
Yes.
Sadly. But is alive and well. And I think certainly Japan does it extremely well. I think a lot of countries in this part of the world, that's a sweeping statement that I have absolutely no evidence for whatsoever, just do that, these kinds of death rituals much better. Catholicism held it very nicely, I think, in that regard, but again, a lot of that's been sanitized somehow. I don't know, Gretchen. I want to just return back to, there was a story you told me, and I don't know if we're getting out of our lane here, but you know, you don't have to tell it, where you were 5. And okay, let me rewind a bit. First of all, I just want to witness your family at that time and just say, what a lovely bunch of people, all trying to make each other feel better.
Yeah.
Everybody just doing their absolute best. You, your dad, your mum, everybody just trying their very best.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To look after each other in an unimaginable situation. So there's that. Then you told me a story about how you sat on the stairs and people was kind of, you always got this message that you were too young and you didn't understand, and to some degree you said that was true. On the other hand, you said that you did realize at one point that he'd gone. You really, really understood it. And then you told me a story about a Native American tradition of something. I can't remember what it was. It was when we were in great flow sometime, and I don't know if we're kind of veering off our lane here. Where you visited and something I can't remember what it was now, but
I don't know exactly, but what had happened is just this past year, I sort of tiptoed these past 5 years, getting closer and closer to sort of this knot. You can sort of imagine this painful thing. Yeah. And when I finally got there, and this was through many, many years of meditation, many years of talking about it with my husband, bringing it up with my parents, talking to you. I even got a grief counselor. So I don't want, this was a lot of work to get there. When I finally got to sort of this core pain, it just suddenly felt like I was home. It was, and I was afraid to get there. I thought I was going to be flooded I was afraid to really go to that sort of difficult, really, really difficult pain of losing my brother, which is the first arrow, let's just say. And when I finally got there, I felt just so liberated and like I was home, and I was sort of held by my ancestors and by my brother. And I'm not sure the language I used when we talked about it, so I may have been referencing something, because there's a poet, this
Yes.
American poet I like. I have to look it up.
Yes.
But she was sort of talking about this sort of like communication or exchange with our ancestors that just felt very liberating and humbling and beautiful. And so when I finally got to this place that I was so afraid to really get to, and I was so afraid to sit with that really deep pain, I had realized that I had sort of been present with my brother. I had gone through his death in a really innocent, unabridged, unbiased point of view because I was so young, right? So normally it was almost like, wow, what I'd experienced in those first days, in those first few weeks was actually very pure. It was very like, I'm accepting what's happening. I'm confusing. I'm riding these waves of confusion. Is he coming back? Is he not coming back? But I was fully present, which is the whole point of like, you know, mindfulness and a lot of the Zen is like, can you be present right now with what is happening? And when I finally got to that place, I thought, oh, I was very, very present with his death. And I had felt I had sort of had one foot in the afterworld and one foot here. And I felt that sort of ethereal time like that. When I think of that time, it's a very deep time state for me, you know, there's no chronology to it. And I think actually I probably very, very much was with him on his journey into the afterworld. You know, like I was there with him because you don't, as a young child, you don't have anything, no BS to be like this or it's their fault, or it was just you're fully present with it. And then I had covered it up with years of what I had absorbed of, well, you don't really remember him or you didn't understand. And that was the story I had to let go of.
Yeah.
That didn't serve me any longer. That was the second arrow. And then when I could finally get rid of that, it was like, wow, I had been present. I don't have to be afraid of losing the memories, you know, that I was holding so tightly onto. It's like, they're with me at all times, you know? So I do forget the language I used, but I know that's sort of how I felt when I finally could sort of be with that experience.
Gorgeous. No, you've just described exactly what it was. And I think we spun off into talking about some other stuff as well. But that poet, if you could.
Yeah, I think her name is Joy. Her name is Joy Harjo.
Joy Harjo.
Yeah.
I'll link to that.
Yeah, please do. She's amazing.
Sounds beautiful. This is absolutely gorgeous. So there's a couple of things. All I can think of is Japanese words to describe this now. So I'll try and do it with as much eloquence as I can. It's like that moment where you were like, oh, I was with him. So there's like that kind of like gentleness of like, naruhodo.
Yeah. It's
like, I see.
No words to explain.
Like, and then there's also that kind of like, wakatta. Like, it's a bit more kind of like, woohoo, like, I got it. I get it, that kind of feeling. So there's like that thing, but then the word that really springs to mind is satori, and favorite ever words. And I wonder, like, you just to be clear here, Gretchen, now in your mid 40s, is that right?
Yes, 45. Yeah,
45, has been living on in a Zen Buddhist temple for the last 25 years, where her husband is the priest and is part of an ancestral line that is in there. So she kind of joins that. So when we're talking about Buddhism and stuff like that, we're not doing like, I wear my mala beads and go to the beach kind of Buddhism. And then fine, if that's your gig, nice one. But we're talking about somebody who's lived and breathed this for 25 years.
I know. It's like, wow.
And satori is that, as I understand it, I'll say it in my kind of clumsy way first. What just happened to me there, where I went, that's one of the ways that satori shows itself through the physiology. It can be like I can't remember what it is. It's like a spiritual awakening, or like where you get this kind of, I imagine it's like stars around your head going, or a light bulb comes up. It's like that light. There's something light about it, or illuminate. I think you've already used the word illuminated today. How would you describe satori?
Yeah, absolutely a lightness. Well, an enlightenment, right? We have
enlightenment. Yeah, that's it. That's the literal translation.
That's the literal translation. But people sometimes, particularly in the West, become obsessed with, I want to be enlightened, or can I'm like, who cares? Don't worry about it. And we all at every moment have access to that.
Yeah.
and you never know when it's going to come, and it could be in a really simple thing, or it could be something really profound, which was finally grieving 40 years later the loss of a sibling, of a brother that you loved, you know. And so but it's there for us at any moment, but don't search for it, don't look for it, you know, it'll come when you're present. So and I have, we've shared so many stories, but I'll just share one that would connect us to the temple, because all of these little crumbs were leading up to me finally sort of healing this loss, right? And one thing that happened probably about 6 or 7 years ago at the temple was during Obon. So Obon is the Buddhist, I guess you could say, holiday in the summer, where people go home and then they go to the temple. And there's this belief that your ancestors are coming to visit you. That's the simplest thing. And then people come to the temple and open their each, little butsudan, that they have a small shrine at the temple. This is how we do it. There might be some differences depending on the sect. And I should say my husband's family temple is Soto Shu.
Say again.
So it's Soto, S-O-T-O, and then Shu just means sect. So it's the lineage of Dogen. So Dogen went to China, brought back Zen. So Zen is not only in Japan. And then there are different Zen sects in Japan.
Okay.
So that's the lineage if someone's interested in it. And so Obon is a very, very important time for our temple and the community in Japan at large, right? And so as a temple family, we have to clean all of our ancestral tombs. And it's always very, very hot and humid. Yeah. So I never look forward to this. And I always felt, again, this sense of disconnection. Well, this isn't my heritage. And part of it was I was very intentionally being careful not to just come here and jump on the bandwagon. Like I had to give myself time to understand what this tradition was.
I'm a Buddhist now.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, and I have a really, and
I've had a Satori and now I'm a Buddhist.
Exactly. Exactly. And
my vitamins.
Exactly. And I should say my husband nor his parents have ever once asked me if I'm Buddhist or want to become a Buddhist. They don't care.
Yeah.
They don't, it's not about being a Buddhist, it's about practicing.
Wow. That's very Western style, isn't it? You must convert to my religion in order to, or not Western style, I don't know how to describe that, but that's like, you have to convert in order to be part. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And isn't that beautiful?
Anyway, is it?
Like you think, here's Japan with all of its rules, right? And way of behaving, and they genuinely don't care if their daughter-in-law is a Buddhist. I just love that. I just absolutely love that. And I would say almost, and it doesn't bother me, it doesn't offend me, there's nothing wrong with it, but my family and friends have all asked me, so are you Buddhist now? I'm like, I don't know, maybe not, I don't care. I have no need to be a Buddhist. I do practice Buddhism, but I don't need to be a Buddhist.
Yeah.
And a lot of that I sort of got from how open-minded my in-laws and husband are about it. Mm-hmm. Just because it doesn't even cross their radar to ask me. It's a non-issue.
No.
So back to Obon. So we were every August before Obon, we go and we have a big cemetery behind our temple, and we live in a pretty rural area. So there's a beautiful forest back there. It's very nice. It's up on a hill, you can look out at the water. Nevertheless, it's like brutally hot, and we have to clean these very, very huge sort of cement tombstones. So and you're brushing it and you're just drenched in sweat. Most people would just clean their family one, but we have, probably 15 because of all the priests who have been here before, right?
You have to clean the previous priests ones who have passed on and honor them. So you're constantly honoring the lineages. Okay.
Yes, so we have one whole section that would be the priests and then the families, and my husband's only the third generation of priests who can marry. So before that, it wasn't allowed to be married. So there's one section that's just priests, and then there's the sections of the grandma and grandpa of my husband, so who have passed on, who were who was a priest here. Nevertheless, one of our members, who is a married couple, they don't have children and they're getting older, and they had asked, I think they originally asked, Kenna, would you mind just washing the tomb for us? We're just getting too old and we don't have children to wash it. And I was standing there, and they're like, Gretchen, would you mind doing that for me? And I didn't think much of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to be honest. I was a little bit not looking forward to it. I was like, oh my God, now I have to watch another
I
tomb.
need to tell you, August in Japan, bonkers. Just imagine any film you've seen about like the tropics. It's tropical. You are sweating all day. It's gross.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Yeah, whenever you're imagining 10 times the humidity, I get very, very splotchy. I mean, there's a real fear of overheating. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to this. I don't have a great attitude about it. I've never enjoyed cleaning the tombstones. And we were laughing because I was telling you this and I thought, all my friends are taking vacations, going to France, posting about it. I'm like, I'm literally cleaning tombstones in August. Like, where did my summer vacation go?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not thrilled. So I go up and we're all washing and I thought, oh, I'll go wash this couple. They're members of our temple. I'll go wash their tombstone. And this is a satori moment. Because you can't explain it. There's no words. There's no thinking. When you're thinking, you can't have satori. I just started washing it. And then again, it's like an opening. It's like a splitting of the skies where I suddenly thought, what an honor it is for me to be washing their tombstone. What a tremendous honor it is. And that's what we do for each other. We take care of one another. Right. And I felt such a profound connection to them as members, but also the ancestors of the temple, the people who built the temple, the people who lived in the community. And I sort of finally gave myself permission to belong to this community because I was the one sort of holding myself back a lot of times. You're looking to all these exterior things of, oh, they treat me this way, or I don't speak perfect Japanese. And I was sort of creating all these boundaries. And finally, through this very simple, almost mundane gesture of washing something, I finally felt, oh, I could belong. And I also sort of knew, oh, they asked me, and their asking was a gesture of, we're welcoming you, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's how I'm going to take it, right? Yes. You know, to feel like, oh, we're trusting Gretchen to wash something that's very, very sacred for us. And like I said, they don't have children. And I had this moment of like, this deep desire to just always watch over this. So now this is like my tombstone. I always wash, but also every member at our temple. I thought, what an honor it is for me to sort of be able to care, because the ancestral lineage is so important in Japan. And that was after living here for, 12, 13 years. This was not a quick thing, but finally I felt, oh, I can be part of this too. And also it connects you to, the people we've lost. I've lost grandparents. I've lost, as I mentioned, my brother. You just sort of open up to that sort of universal, I don't want to say suffering as much as just people lose people, and we have to take care of one another, and we have to sort of watch over one another.
In the most simple way, I would say. The same lived experience that all of us has through grief, through birth. Yeah.
And it's like, I grew up on the East Coast in a Catholic faith, and here I am, and it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. The universal truth is the same. And again, it's a moment. It's a clarity that comes through you. And I looked up feeling like joy. I was like, talk about like emanating joy. I was like, wow. I look up and there are my kids running around, splashing each other with water, scrubbing like Hihi Obachan's tombstone. And I felt such joy and happiness in that moment of, wow, what a lovely life I'm leading, to be here at this moment, experiencing this sense of connection and belonging. And that moment would have been a moment of satori. And I think little moments like that led to me sort of finally getting to real healing about my brother. It's all sort of connected. It sort of builds and leads.
Twice now you've mentioned a splitting.
Yeah. It's like for me, it's like an opening up. When you're fully present, whether it was like intentional or not, when you're just sort of in the moment, you're very present, something opens up to you that sort of transcends time or transcends language.
I just got two images there. One was like, when thunder's right overhead, thunder lightning's right overhead, and it goes and you're like, and you feel like you're going to split open. So there's that, like, it's inside your body. But also a much gentler thing is like just before a seed and it just goes and it splits. Like that's what has to happen first. And then some dirt is before the cotyledons are able to come up above the thing. Some dirt has to be pushed out.
Yeah, and that's beautiful.
And the other thing is, like, it's like, it took me 13 years to get to this point. It's like, is that all? It's like, well, and that was, we put it into like the ancestral lineages and the things that we kind of inherit down the lines, or from a biological perspective, the DNA that we carry inside us, you know, it's like, is that all?
Absolutely. And I would say that was sort of the beginning of me sort of saying, you belong here too. It's okay. You can look for belonging. It's okay. So again, those are beginning moments.
So for some context here, Gretchen, for people who are listening, we're both foreigners in Japan. So we're very conspicuous. I'm a foreigner. I was a foreigner in Tokyo, and now I'm a foreigner in like an hour outside of Tokyo. So I'm still super conspicuous. Like I never go unnoticed ever. How many foreigners are in your town?
Well, there are some foreigners. They do tend to be other women from Asian countries. Right. And when I first moved here, one of our members had married a Filipino woman, and she had a child the same age as my son. So it was lovely. We would go to parks together, go to the zoo. And I remember complaining to her because I thought, oh, I'm so tired of people looking at me. This was, you know, those first few years.
It's a lot.
It's hard and it wears you down. That's the other thing. It just sort of wears you down. And I should say that, you know, there's probably some English teachers, you know, always sprinkled around that come and go. And some of them I've become good friends with. But for the most part, there's, you know, very, very few foreigners and probably fewer Western foreigners. I don't know any other English speaking Western foreigner. But I was complaining to her about, oh, well, I sort of stand out and I'm tired of it. People look at me, or my oldest son is quite Western looking. And I was like, sort of implying, I might have even said it. I'm like, well, you're lucky because you look Asian and your kids look Asian. And she's like, what? She's like, you're American and everybody looks up to Americans. You're Akogare and I'm the Filipino. And she really put me in my spot. And I'm forever grateful for that. I'm forever grateful for that because she was warm about it. It wasn't mean. And I learned so much from her. We're still good friends. Our sons have now gone on to, you know, they're both out of the house, living their lives. But it was such an important moment for me to be like, oh yeah, people having different experiences in Japan. And what I was sort of wanting from her is that sort of anonymity, because it's uncomfortable for me. I'm going to tell you, like, it is uncomfortable to get the looks, to get the comments.
Oh, I've stayed indoors for weeks at a time just because I didn't want to open up.
But then I thought, oh, look at her feeling, people are so dismissive of her and condescending and have sort of quite hurtful views about her as a Filipina. And so that was really helpful for me. Beautiful. And it sort of keeps me in check, you know, keeps me in check a little bit.
It is very important for us to note that white privilege does follow you around.
It does.
I mean, that's not somewhere we're going to visit today. We'll visit and just say that, but like that, it sounds like she just, again, in that very kind of in it way, schooled you a little bit there on that.
And you can tell people,
especially for other Asian people living in Japan, that can be a massive, a massive thing. Probably like people who are like from other European countries living in the UK, they get a bit of that like as well. To say the very least.
But I will say on this topic, again, being mindful and practicing meditation sort of helps me because even though she really did help me become a little bit more self-aware and sensitive. Of course, you know, I would still get very angry and get self-absorbed and lose myself and get, you know, triggered a lot of times. And then I remember about 5 years ago, I went to Sendai to have like a fun shopping trip with my daughters. And we went to a department store that was really nice and I was trying to buy something. And then the sales clerk was just very uncomfortable around me, you know, just hyper uncomfortable. And, oh, do you speak Japanese? And I was trying to be reassuring. Yes, I speak Japanese. And then she would look to my daughter who was like 12. Oh, can your mommy read this? And I could feel my blood boiling, right? You can just feel it coming up.
And that's fine.
Yeah, so I was feeling it. But then I had this moment, because mindfulness is sort of practicing to be with whatever's present, right? Whatever emotion is there, and just to be present with it and just to see it. So I was sort of seeing myself getting very triggered, quite irritated by all of this. And sort of under the guise of, oh, she's humiliating me in front of my daughters. And then my reaction to her was very unskillful. That's a really great word in Buddhism. Just if you're acting bad, you're being unskillful, right? You don't have to take it personally. You're just being unskillful. And so I was sort of getting irritated, like, yeah, I can speak Japanese, but then actually I didn't know the kanji or something, so, and then the humiliation and shame was coming up and all these emotions.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of for a moment saw this woman and I thought, oh, I'm her. Like her ignorance is my ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Like in America, I'm part of the dominant culture, right? And how many times have I just not been aware of the person I was talking to unintentionally? And suddenly, I mean, it literally was like stress falling off my shoulders, like my jaw was relaxing. And I thought, I don't know her story. Maybe she had a difficult experience with a foreigner once. Maybe she's from the rural countryside and just moved to the big city. This is Sendai. And this is her first experience. But also sort of being able to see my discomfort and all of these triggers going off, I was able to sort of see the experience a little bit more clearly and have compassion for her and find connection between us. And so it was sort of seeing, what am I not liking right now? And I'm using the word ignorance, and I don't mean that in a rude way towards her, but just the non-knowing how to interact with a foreigner. And then you sort of say, well, where have I been ignorant in my life? Where is that showing up for me? Or where have I been ignorant? And just to sort of be more gentle with it. And my whole like physical like disposition changed. And I also realized in front of my children are looking to me how I'm acting. They're not looking to her how she's acting.
Yeah.
Right. So that whole notion of like, I can't really control how she's going to treat me. She's still uncomfortable around me, but I can act a little bit more pulled together and dignified and not come unhinged. I'm not saying it's not hard. It's hard. Sometimes it really is. I get worn down by it. But that was also one of those points where I thought, oh, we're sort of in this together. Her ignorance is my ignorance. I've been in her place. I'm sure I've hurt people's feelings unintentionally, particularly when I was part of the dominant culture. And now I'm not. You're
skilled.
Yeah. And it's unskilled, and we can sort of not take it personally and try to sort of look at ourselves instead of pointing fingers, and sort of ideally sort of together try to awaken, because I would also think, well, if I'm kind and patient with her, her next experience will be better with a foreigner. Because she wasn't being mean or anything.
No, and also
she really wasn't.
It's really, there's also, I love this idea of splitting. So like I always like to try and tease apart, like we can honor that part of us that feels really, really uncomfortable, while at the same time honoring that part of her that feels uncomfortable. It's like, I tell the truth about my feelings. I don't have to pretend that I'm not feeling them, but also I don't have to play out of them. And against the backdrop of a kind of psychological background or psychotherapeutic background, and I'm unskilled in this, by the way, what we're talking about is codependence. And so if her behavior, if your state of mind and your emotional state is dependent on her treating you a certain way that you've conjured in your mind or not, that's codependence. And that ability to kind of unplug from that means that you can then just both be, and now we're back into the kind of mindfulness talk, mindfulness backdrop, is like that you can just allow to, yours was practicing being with whatever's present. That's your words. And you know, I'm a mindfulness amateur, so I'm using your words. I just love that. And it's interesting because one of my coaches said to me earlier in there, I moved to the seaside and I was just really keen to kind of get to know everybody here and to become part of the community and blah, blah, blah. And I said, like, I've started to get a little bit twitchy about, like, do the shopkeepers own me? And she just went, Sarah, that's codependence. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. All these years, all this coaching, and I'm literally like placing my value and my mood on how the person in the coffee shop treats me that day, scanning all the while for reasons why. Aged 49, by the way, it's like, what planet of my own. And I just loved that. I loved that she called me out, because
Yep.
she doesn't have codependence. She didn't have any codependence on trying to make me feel better in that moment. She just called it, and I was like, yeah. And I think this is really important for us to acknowledge how hard it can be to stick out all the time, which then means that we can have compassion for the people in our own countries who stick out all the time, and what that means. But not only that, but also just be like, it is going to, if I go out to this particular party tonight, I'm going to have to answer the same. I'll say, yeah, I've been in Japan for 20 years, but we'll still be talking about the things that I was talking about 20 years ago. And that's okay. But I'm going to be tired afterwards, and I might want to call my best mate or text my girls from home or something where I can just kind of plug back into the reality that I feel. Okay.
Yeah. And this is one of those annoying buzzwords, but it is just self-care. It's like, right? It's like, well, what can I do to sort of ease that? Because it is hard. It gets old. So go home for me is like read a book. I have a little nook that I sit in, and you can just feel it washing over you. Like, this is my little refuge, and I can sit here and be okay. And then I can battle the world again tomorrow. You know, and we fall down, like we recognize our codependencies, and then we just sort of brush ourselves off and try better the next time.
It's just kind of tiring, right? That's it. It's not like I'm going to get shot or something, frankly speaking. I don't mean to make light of that, or to be like to just be I can't think of the word, dismissive, or no, the word's gone, but like just to be kind of to make light of it at all. Okay, so there was another thing that I just wanted to touch on here from that I thought was a lovely thing. That another thing that I think, if I remember rightly, prompted your connection back to Chris was an image, and I've actually drawn it here, which is that of you were walking behind your kids, or you were driving past your kids, and you saw your son, who's a similar gap between you and Chris, holding your daughter's hand and walking along the street. Can you just describe, if you're able to describe that, I would love that.
No, I'm happy to. And that was a really pivotal moment for me. So like I'd said, I really hadn't thought about my brother. I didn't talk about him. I couldn't talk about him, to be totally honest. And here I am raising children, you know, and of course, as a parent, you sort of see yourself, you know, you're growing up with your children.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it. I had never really put it together, but my oldest son and my youngest daughter are the same age difference between me and Chris. So I have 4 children. And well, I guess when Kai was 11, Sophia, my youngest, was born. But then depending on the year, you know, 11 or 12 years difference. And my son went to high school in America. So I had actually taken all 4 kids to America for a year to study. And then he said, you know what, I think I'm going to stay. I really like it. He was clicking with just sort of how the schools run, how people interact. And he was actually born in America, but spent most of his life in Japan. So he ended up staying in Japan. And that was really hard for me. I'm not going to lie. Like every time I saw a kid like in a uniform pass me, I was like, like his age range. Like it was so hard because he's on the other side of the world. And, but of course I wanted him to have this opportunity. And then Sophia was little, like 3 or 4, right? And then when she was 5, he was coming home. So he'll come home every summer, right?
He'd help stay in the US.
So he lives in America. He was going to high school, and then he would come home for the summers.
Gotcha.
And so Sophia's now 5. So he's been gone a few years now, or a couple of years. And all year she would be like, I can't wait for Kai to come home. And, you know, we would FaceTime him, and she was just like, tell little funny stories about Kai. And just, she was the most excited for him to come home. And he's 17 now. Now I'm starting, his birthday's in May. So he turned 17, and then he came home that June or July. And again, me being very cut off from that emotional pain, I wasn't really putting it together, but I was sort of starting to feel all of this energy around like, okay, in retrospect, my son is 17. That's when my brother died. Like, I just wanted to get over it. I remember feeling like I just can't wait till he's 18. I need to get through this hell year because there's a lot of fear. And in America, people drive and he's driving. And of course, I wasn't dealing with that.
Yeah.
It was all quite repressed. But anyway, so my daughter can't wait for him to come home. So he comes home. And like the next day they have this little festival, those little matsuris, you know, at the school. And she's like, you have to come with me, Kai. Please come with me. He's like, okay, I'll come with you. And so she was wearing her little yukata. And I live, like I said, in the rural side. And her little kindergarten is next to this massive, open, wide rice field. It's really beautiful. And we're walking, and they're walking in front of me, and he's holding her hand. And it just, again, there's no words to really describe it. But I used to be afraid that like I didn't have a real relationship with my brother, or, you know what I mean? Because again, I was too young, or there wasn't a bond. Like, was there a bond? Was there real love? Was there real affection? Did we know each other? Did we laugh together?
That second arrow.
It's just a big, huge second arrow. And it's like, yeah. And all of that real fear of something that I so desperately wanted. Was that real? You know, all this stuff. And seeing them together, and also just how much Sophia missed him as a little girl, 3, 4, 5, how much she missed him, and what a real relationship they had, and how much he loved her. Like just real love, real affection. That's his little baby sister. And then they're holding hands. And then later he put her up on his shoulder. I mean, there was so much affection. And again, another one of these like splitting open moments. Yeah. And actually, Sarah, that was a very, very, very profound moment for me. I mean, I almost felt like I was levitating, and I felt my brother's presence. It was like, oh, Chris is behind this 100%. This is Chris. I mean, and it felt light, and it felt like time doesn't exist right now, and somewhere his energy is in the universe guiding me to this place. It was so loving and so comforting. And that was the beginning of my healing process. So again, it's always like the beginning. It's not the end. It was like, okay, yes, I can do this. And I remember thinking, wow, I can still have a relationship with my brother. Being dead does not mean you can't have a relationship with somebody. And I had just pushed all of that to the side. And so I told my kids this story, and I thought, you guys have brought me to this place, right? And so, you know, I'm a mother of 4. I love being a mother in many, many, many ways. They've helped me become who I am. But I thought, you brought me here, you know, and I was ready to see it. Maybe there was 1,000 signs my brother had been leaving me that I had missed, right? But at this time, I was finally open to it. I was finally willing to sort of soften that part of me that could see it. And it was so healing. It was so healing and so lovely to see their bond. And then I really felt like I was looking at my brother and myself. That's what I really, and it felt that way. And it's funny because I was in this like matsuri, just like I literally was just probably standing there, like soaking it up. But it wasn't like a flood of emotions. It was really transcending that. It was like, wow, you know, I mean, for a few months I was like, wow, you know, like, wow, this is quite remarkable what I experienced. And I was able to share it with my children, and I was able to share it with my husband, and then later I shared it with my parents and my sisters, and it was just such a joyful thing for me.
Amazing. And like that was another one of those moments that led you to really opening the gates to quite a fast and rapid path to talking about Chris like this. Now I suppose you would have had access to this amount of ability to talk, skill to talk about him at that point. I feel like we need to do a part 2. There's no possible way I'm going to get into how you met your husband and what that whole story. That's a whole thing in itself, because that's such a fun kind of comedic story that like I just think it's like, it's one of, I say this quite often, if I presented just 1 year of one of my clients or friends or interviewees' stories to Hollywood and said, here's a movie, they'd go, I'm sorry, that's a bit far-fetched. Tone it down, nobody's going to believe that. And it's just like, so that I think we're going to have to do a part 2. But just to close up today, because we've talked about Chris so much, and this, I'm going to dedicate this episode to Chris and his memory, a lovely family as well, who, you know, just were doing their best. I'm interested to fast forward right up until now, when you've just been back to America in the middle of COVID to help your mum out. And without going into detail, I know there was an incident where you just were asking for, like, how do I deal with this? Again, it's like sometimes when we get up in other people's business, but it means a lot to us. So what? No detail, because that's about somebody else. But like, something happened then, didn't you? Kind of go for a drive and visit. So can you just talk about that, and then we'll kind of close out, because I think this is a beautiful way again that you kind of putting together the puzzle of Chris in your way, and these rituals and all the things that we kind of been talking about. And
no, I appreciate the invitation to talk about it. Well, I was back in my hometown. Pretty much, I tease, I was just feeding my mother. She has lung cancer, and she had surgery, and she just lost a lot of weight, and she just sort of needed to get back to a healthy state. So I went to care for her. And yes,
just stop. I just want to be really clear for the listeners here. What Gretchen is saying here, in the middle of COVID, when you're not supposed to travel, she left her family, 3 kids, at the temple, to go and care for her mum for 3 months. This is huge. This is such an unusual and incredible thing to do. So I just also want to honor that while we're talking about it, because otherwise it just sounds like you just went up the road to feed your mum, if we're not consciously saying that's what happened. You went through a lot of hoops to do this, took a lot of risk, and had to, it's an admirable and a big thing to do. So there's that. All right, let's jump back into the story.
So I was there, and the first month, there were elements that were stressful, right? You're sort of figuring things out. Well, there's sort of 2 parts to the story. One part, I think I told you, and my mother and I I thought, I'm going to paint some rooms. I'm going to sort of spiff up a couple of rooms. And actually I wanted to paint the room my son had been using, but I'd never painted before. So I was like, Mom, I don't really know how to paint. Maybe we should hire somebody. So she literally opened up the yellow pages, biggest ad. She called him. And he's talking and everything, or they're talking. And he's like, wait, are you Chris's mom? And she's like, yeah, I'm Chris's mom. And he's like, you probably don't remember me, but I played Pop Warner football. We went to different high schools, but I knew Chris, and we played football together, probably when they were like 12. And Mom's like, oh, that's great. He's like, no, this is crazy. He's like, I went up to visit my mom, who lives in Vermont now, and I forgot my coat. So she's like, go grab a coat that she had, for 20, 30 years in the garage or something. It was his old coat from when he was, no, this guy, his Ray. He went, put on his old coat from his mom's house. In the pocket was a newspaper article of him and Chris playing football together. One of those local like photos of, Pop Warner football, Chris, and the 2 of them were in the article, the name and a photo. And he was like, I was just thinking about Chris. And had just been like that weekend. He's like, I just can't believe you called me. This is so cool. And then he started to tell my mother just what a cool guy Chris was and how much fun they had together. And my mom, hung up, and she lives in the town. So maybe because I live so far away, don't you love connections like that?
Of course.
Like I always tease my husband. I'm like, I never bump into old kindergarten friends. It's like, you're here just sort of floating around because you don't have the roots. Now we make the roots, but we don't have the roots.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's just my deep appreciation for connections like that because I live so far away, but I was like, Mom, that's amazing. And she was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'm like, no, it's amazing. It's amazing. And then I said, let it be huge. Let it be magical. Like, let's just joyfully rejoice that you had this lovely conversation with the painter Ray, you know what I mean, who loved Chris and remembered Chris and had fun playing football, and you had this thing. And then she just, her whole face brightened up, and then she ended up telling my sisters, and it just became this fun story we were telling each other, and it was so lovely. And again, we can miss those opportunities.
Yeah.
We can miss them. We can say, oh, it's not a big deal, who cares, but it is a big deal.
Yeah.
And that happened. And then that Saturday, I was just really struggling with something going on, like medically, feeling quite conflicted that just, there's that restlessness. I didn't know what to do. And I was like, and it's COVID, so you can't do too much, but there was a farmer's market. So I get in the car, I thought, I'll just go over to the farmer's market and get some stuff. And I'm driving there, and something was like, no, you don't want to go to the farmer's market. And I just was like driving. Where am I going? And I drove to my brother's grave, to the cemetery. And I got out and I know where it is. It's all sort of like, you know, it's in your body, you know.
Yeah.
It is. It's muscle memory. I go there. And I should say the tombstone of my brother is really beautiful. Might not get it verbatim, but my parents wrote, and this is a real tribute to them as amazing humans. They said, let us not grieve that he was taken from us, but rejoice that he was given to us. And I thought, what parent could write that within, you know, a week of their son dying? So that is a real tribute to their strength and their belief, right? And again, I never really appreciated that until I was a parent. That didn't really make sense to me until I was a parent. But anyways, I went and I actually lied down and probably sat there for an hour and a half looking up at the trees. It's a beautiful September morning, you know, the leaves are sort of rustling in the wind. And I was like, I don't know, just a tremendous peace came over me. And I remember like thanking the tree for watching over my brother, because it's this beautiful tree that sort of goes over, and just lying there. And so much of whatever I had been struggling with, whatever it was, just started to dissolve, you know? And it just brought me so much peace and so much comfort in that moment. And part of that, I know for a fact he was on my mind because of that phone call my mom had. So again, it's sort of piecing all of these little things together. And I would say I had a lovely, lovely time being there with my mother. Yeah. It meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
And that thing I had been struggling with, had I not been able to sort of work through it, I think it would have prevented me from really, really being present with my mother. So that day I had that opportunity just to sort of let it go a little bit, be present with it and let it go. Yeah. And I do feel like that was Painter Ray and my brother's doing, you know what I mean?
Shout out to Painter Ray.
Well, and I should say I ended up painting the rooms because my mom and I are cheap. We're like, we can do it ourselves. So poor him. And he said he was so busy because of COVID. Everyone's redoing their houses.
Yeah, because they're like, whoa, this place looks like shit.
Yeah, exactly. So he was fine, but I ended up painting it. But I thought, oh, I love stories like that. I love when you welcome them and let them into your life. Yeah.
And actually the group that we're both members of, like, let it be huge, has become our slogan now, because, you know, we're very careful, you and I are very careful not to be drawn down some kind of magical thinking, as in bullshit.
Yes.
Like, we're very careful to remain ethical within the bounds of the things that we know and know to be true. On the other hand, we also love these stories of coincidence and breadcrumbs and lineups and those things that make you feel that like splitting, or the satori, or the like those feelings of just like levitating or whatever it is. And so we just say, let it be huge. We don't need to question it too much. Just let it be huge.
Yes.
And then all these things start surfacing with that, like in the group that we're both members of. Then the group starts surfacing things because we allow it to be huge. So we don't need to believe in anything. We don't need to believe in heaven and hell. We don't need to believe in anything supernatural. We just say, let it be huge. Let it be magical. Yeah. Let it mean something. Just how about that? And I love that. And I think this is a beautiful place to just kind of wrap up, actually, Gretchen, on this particular call, which has been so focused on death and grief, and but in the most joyful and huge way. And you've very kindly taken us through your whole process, actually, of like from that childhood thing. It's like you've taken us through a whole life, and I mean, neither of us know what the first 17 years of Chris's life were and what he felt. We just know that your 5 years of him and how that was reflected in your observation of your children, and how huge that is. And, you know, it's nice that we're able to weave together like psychology and the supernatural and the magical, and Buddhism and Catholicism, and being a foreigner and living in this wonderful country that we both love so much, and that we both, you know, understand. We're getting, even through all this work that we do together, we get a greater understanding of who we are here.
Absolutely.
Without needing that codependence to plug in to be we're accepted as we're accepted, and that's that. And it's a, I don't know, it's let it be huge. And I've really loved this, and I hope that people are able to take heart from some of this conversation, and introduce more perhaps ritual or marking of things into their own grief journeys or life journeys as well. You know, anything that's been kind of lost or washed away in the loss of religion as is, how can we kind of bring that back in and incorporate it into our lives in a way that we can process our physiological grief and our psychological grief in a way that is held by many people in the community and so on. I mean, there's so many more things I'd love to touch on, but I think we should do a part 2, and then we can talk about temple life and how your husband and the visits that he does and all that kind of stuff. I would love to do that if you're up for it.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is such fertile ground, and I would love to keep talking. So thank you. This has been so fun, though.
Too.
Just to sort of let it organically unfold.
It's amazing. It's like somebody's spying on us talking.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like this is just you and I talking like we normally do. So it's just,
these conversations should feel like this. Yeah. This is just about people's you know, the many ways to lead a life. If you want to just grab my tagline, and like how everybody has stories, and there's so many similarities and so many differences and so many different ways to do it. With that, is there any parting words that you have for people who are listening, Gretchen?
Oh, well, that's, I didn't think of anything, but if we're going to just talk about grief, I would just sort of say, if you have some unresolved grief, you know, that it's okay. Like, you know, work your way slowly towards healing it. And it's amazing for me, the joy that's come from that. Like we were just saying, like, I was so afraid it was going to be this dark plodding through, but when I finally started to really sit with my grief and really be with it, what's come from it is a deep sense of connection, a deep sense of belonging and knowing and joy. So it's just been really lovely for me.
I love that. Love that. And I'm just like, I love the second arrow thing, because it actually gives a physical manifestation of that grief, or the second wave, that
well, the suffering,
suffering. And you can even, like, from a systems coaching perspective, is actually say, this is the second arrow, put it out in front and have a conversation with it and try it out in different places, and put it at all kinds of different techniques that one can have conversation. Go on.
Not to go on and on, but it's like, what is not serving you anymore? Let it go, which is the second arrow. And that you have complete authority over that. So this story I'd been telling me myself that was so painful and hurtful, one of disconnection and not belonging to my brother, or not, you know, that wasn't even true. And again, so we'll talk more, but it's just very liberating.
Oh my God. And
very liberating.
I'm really offering to an even more Japanese ritual now, where we get the arrows at the end of the year, and then the following year,
we burn them.
There's an animal.
When we burn them.
You go and you take it to the temple, you burn that arrow, and then, so there's just this constant sense of renewal and destruction, and wow, I mean, I'm a few pennies are dropping for me right now. I've got FBGs right now. It's like, it's non-stop. I mean, you can read, you know, you can read your books about stuff, and you can listen to the podcasts, and you can have these conversations, but then sometimes that, it's Satori, I suppose, like that kind of like mini Satoris.
But that's all there is. That's all there is. Like, there is no constant state of Satori. So it's all there is this moment. And if this moment brings you that Satori or enlightenment, then that's that moment.
I feel quite flushed.
Yeah.
Proud of myself for having made it. Oh, we're funny things, humans, aren't we? Gretchen, thank you. That's been absolutely brilliant, and I really hope it's brought heart to people. I will drop into the comments about the book I mentioned, Grief Works by Julia Samuel. I'll also drop in the poet that you mentioned as well. And where can people find you, Gretchen?
Well, for my temple, the name of our temple is Dairuji, which means big dragon, and I have an Instagram page. So if you could put that in the show notes,
sure,
that would probably be the best. That's probably the best place to find me if you're interested.
Your Instagram page, that? name?
It's Daiduji, I think _ Oga.
Okay. Yeah, I'll drop it into the show notes because it's
yeah.
hard to...
And that I do talk a lot about the rituals at our temple.
Yeah.
Which we haven't even really dived into, which is so lovely. But also mindfulness and Zen.
Yeah.
And a little bit about our family life or things like that, a little bit. So that's, if you're interested in these type of conversations, that's the best place. I also have a website, the same name, Daiduji, then it's just a -oga.com. And there you can find more about the history of our temple, a little bit more about my husband, about the events we run. That's also a lovely resource. That's just a website as well.
It's so beautiful too. And I also just want to do a little shout out to SORAbento.
Thank you.
Cloth, creating things from beautiful cloths thing. And, you know, Gretchen was very, very kind in sending all the group we're members of masks.
Yeah.
Beautifully made masks out of lovely fabrics, but she also makes like lunchbox covers and all kinds of different, and what we call furoshiki, which is like the squares of fabric that people use in Japan to tie things up and carry things. And so I would highly recommend going there and ordering some beautiful face masks from her. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for sharing your way to lead your life. I cannot wait to start talking about the up-to-date stuff and the temple life and so on. And thank you very much for telling us your story, Gretchen.
Thank you, Sarah. You have a really beautiful way of creating and holding space so people can really open up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.